I waited 792 days to once more say the infamous line. It's that time of the year again.
This is Halloween.
No, not that, the other one. But any time is a perfect time to immerse yourself in all the spooky and creepy. So it is time to once again take a trip through the mystical land of imaginary wonders. A world filled with gigantic terrors and mysterious entities. Join me as we continue our deep dive into this mythological rabbit hole of creatures. Some time ago, I was scrolling through the interwebs and I stumbled upon this very video. So simple, yet filled with so much emotion. To actually imagine yourself having a little time-traveling mishap and crashing in the lands before time. Maybe somebody flushed the toilet as you were about to step into your time machine, or phone booth, or hot tub, or whatever, and instead of going to the year 1965, you're now all the way back to the minus 65 millions. Have fun! Not gonna lie, I used to be very into dinosaurs. Like, very into them. But even though I grew out of that specific phase, I never stopped loving them. To actually think that these enormous beasts used to rule this very planet is mind-boggling. And to think that these giants roamed for about 500 times longer than modern humans have even existed. Yes, it turns out they had feathers and whatnot. But in the time between the first of these giant chickens being born and the last of the Triceratops dying out, you could have ruled the entire lifetime of the Roman Empire about 45,000 times over. And I don't think this dude had any freaking feathers, okay? In fact, it's rather funny how indecisive paleontologists are over the look of certain dinosaurs. My boy Spinosaurus has been nerfed a solid 3 or 4 times by now.
Look how they massacred my boy.
No worries, as there's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of other species to choose your favorites from. We have the Ankylosaurus with its tank-like shell and a glob tail, said to be capable of taking down an entire T-Rex. And then there's the Cryolosaurus, who's been compared to the world-famous king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley himself. Or even the Subscribosaurus with its big red body and a very clickable face. And of course there's, this guy with its bulbous head and a lifestyle of eternal sibling rivalry. Their external skull was up to 10 inches thick and they used it to show dominance in head-butting championships. Fascinating. There are so unbelievably many dinosaurs, all with their little quirks, each one cool in its own kind of way, even the one that has like a billion teeth. But my undisputed favorite has to be the Rhizinosaurus, who was a terrifying predator, a literal Wolverine of its time. Equipped with meter-long claws, it would use to tear any prey into shreds. Just kidding. Actually, it was a tender and sweet herbivore that used the long nails to pull down tree branches and probably liked the smell of flowers. I don't know, I've always loved the way this guy looked. Might be because of that one episode of Dino King. Who knows? What I do know is that watching all 6 hours of Walking with Dinosaurs gave me actual nightmares as a kid. With one documentary, these creatures went from being pretty cool to being very unnerving. As the movie does what its title suggests and makes you feel that these were very real animals living in a very wicked animal kingdom. In fact, I feel it's almost a crime that we've never gotten a proper dinosaur horror movie. Elements of this almost shine through in different projects, but never has it been properly and thoroughly explored. An alien isolation type of survival horror game where you have to evade a pack of raptors, or a dark comedy about a time travel adventure gone awry, with characters getting trapped during the worst time to ever walk this earth. Just take my money. But I feel like there's always one lesser known detail people forget to mention about the prehistoric era. Like, yeah, this video creeps me out because it would be terrifying to run away from a T-Rex. We've known that since the 90s. But you know who else roamed these lands even before the dinosaurs? Giant fucking bugs! Horrific critters and slithering insects bigger than your damn car, dragonflies the size of small hills, and centipedes as long as your boss's conference table. Thinking about most kinds of bugs makes my skin crawl, but these things are on a whole nother level of nope. I feel like there should be a subgenre of horror called something like Woodrich horror, the essence of nature itself coming to life in a more literal way, woods that consume stray travelers and turn them into horrid foot soldiers, a forest that steals people. There are so many iterations to this idea, anything from Vault 22 of New Vegas, where the floral infrastructure has taken control of the environment, and now it is your task to clear out this invasive force born out of a failed lab experiment. They're sons of the forest, where the jungles of this mysterious island have given birth to some gruesome locals. Or just about anything you'd see in Darkwood. I've always imagined it in the Evil Dead kind of way, a literal body jacking where the forest kind of just consumes you. You become part of an ecosystem with no thought singular and no choice made without the hive mind. Or you can just look at it like, this plant has teeth and is trying to eat me. A Venus flytrap from your worst nightmares. Plantera from Terraria, Malboro from Final Fantasy, or even Piranha Plant from the Smash Bros series. And only the Smash Bros series.
Here, hold this.
Anything from mossy deer to vine monsters. There's so many different directions you could go, which is why I'm surprised this fake subgenre isn't more popular. But throughout folklore, we find many examples of a more subtle approach. In Greece, dryads are described as tree nymphs, bound to the nature that surrounds them. Any damage to the flora also causes damage to the spirits, with powers to control foliage or even heal fatal wounds. Throughout Eastern Europe, there are stories of moss mothers, ancient guardians of the forest, sometimes illustrated as rocky golems, other times as beautiful but uncanny women with mossy hair and bark-like skin. From the Slavic mythos, we also have the Leshy, not particularly a foe, but in most cases not a friend either. They're said to be able to shapeshift and mimic voices, useful for leading unwanted travelers astray, but as long as you mean no harm to the animals, they will most likely leave you alone. And in Estonian woods, you can catch the echoes of a forbidden tale, a practice of the darkest kinds of arts. A ritual that involves tying together sticks and sharp metal to create what we like to call a krite. The Greit is said to be a magical servant created from household objects, most likely a demon that after being animated vows to serve its master with full obedience. But there's always a deadly catch. The warning reads as follows: the Greit must always have a task at hand. At any and all times must the Greit be completing a job. If no task is given to the Greit, or it's left unattended for a long period of time, the spirit becomes chaotic, violent, and will turn on its master. In order to dispose of a conjured Greit, one must give it an impossible task, like making rope out of sand, or counting every grain in the field. The deep, dark woods are such a fascinating concept to me. There is something inherently eerie about the dense, tall trees as far as the eye can see, with the sun slowly setting and the anxiety of getting lost rising by the second. In moments like this, boy howdy am I glad to be existing in this simple, boring reality of ours, because the offshoot would be a walking nightmare. Pray that you don't run into any Bigfoot or Wendigos. Make sure to keep moving, because I think some of the trees are following you. Damn, it seems like you're walking in circles. Better hope you've just lost your footing and are not stuck in a witch's spiraling trap. Oh no, don't go there. That's what we call the old hunger. Not a creature, but a presence. A part of the woods that all animals avoid. No insects, no birds, no tracks. Just two white shapes shining between the trees, like eyes, but too far apart and too high up. It is said that anybody that catches a glimpse of its face just vanishes. When dealing with these money-hungry green freaks, you gotta take these precautions into consideration, written straight from the Book of Defenses Against Mythical Beings. Secure your booty. No, not that booty. Lock up all your gold, loot, trinkets, and valuables. Make sure not to leave any jewelry lying around. Keep your doors and windows fortified. These guys are small enough to sneak their way into your house unnoticed, so sealing all kinds of attics and basements goes a long way. Use bright lights and loud noises to your advantage. Give yourself the element of surprise with bells on doors or even some motion activated lamps. Remember that if it would scare away a cat, it will probably scare away a goblin. And finally, in case of trouble, start bartering. Any kind of deal or trade you can think of. It doesn't have to be some genius scheme, as they are stupid enough to fall for your tricks. If ever captured, just find something to offer them for your freedom. Try to make the trade clear, as they might be dumb, but this is still their main area of expertise. Ripping these guys off might not end very well for you. But goblins come in many different sizes and shapes. For most of 2nd grade, my schoolmates and I spent our recess chopping wood in front of the Grand Exchange. Back then, I thought cows and goblins were the tip of the iceberg, so imagine the shock on my face when I was introduced to hobgoblins. Nearly 20 years later and I'm still playing this game, and it turns out there's all kinds of goblins. There's a whole land of them, and some deep lore that connects them all to a general of an ancient god. But do not mistake these little guys for orcs or trolls, although they bear very similar characteristics like shagged fangs and some very bad posture. Even the color green is almost universal among all kinds of ogres and kremlins, which usually represents a form of poison or illness. Literal disgust oozing out of these humanoids. They are the backside of the mirror we all stare into. The Hunchback of Notre Dame to our Esmeralda, a Gollum to your Smeargle, an Elizabeth to a Sue. It is the physical manifestation of our ugly side, the absolute furthest end of the scale to showcase our bad angle. These characters are often designed to act, look, and sound repulsive, but with a slight art style change, they become goofy, lovable idiots. I've never actually gotten the chance to play D&D, but if I did, I'd want to be a snow goblin. I don't even know if you can be a goblin, but I've heard stories of people playing as potted plants, so The name of my snow goblin would be Bricks, and he'd be equipped with a long-ass dagger and some cool ice magic. An expert in the ways of stealth and thievery, he'd be the perfect nimble assassin hired for breaking into places. Just keep him away from any kind of torches or stoves or just fire in general. He hates that. Shit. And you could go even a step further and make all kinds of elemental goblins, as long as you don't make them too big and give them a makeshift weapon of any kind. You're in the green, or red, or blue, or maybe even yellow, pink, or purple. The world is your dumpster. Upon my travels, or research as the kids call it these days, I came across a very specific kind of goblin called a kobold. It looks like a half-breed between your traditional goblin and a kind of humanoid dragon, having its orcish features replaced with reptilian attributes. I'm not even gonna attempt to classify which kind of a dragon it is after the whole war that went down in the last video's comments. Didn't know you guys were so touchy about dragons. But thankfully I don't even have to bother, as the German folklore origins depict the kind of mischievous house spirit that can do chores or bring misfortune to their owners, which is like every mythical creature featured in It's a creature feature featured in ye old fairy tales. I just found the modern design of it so striking, which has also mostly evolved out of the aforementioned D&D series. The handbooks of these things are like the Bible to anyone who loves weird little monsters. Zombies are a staple of fantasy and science fiction. I don't want to get depressing on you, but death is all around us. Eventually, everybody's gonna die. That's just the cycle of life. You're gonna die, I'm gonna die, even Jim Carrey is sadly gonna die someday. And in real life, that death is very much final. So the idea of somebody being resurrected is by nature very unorthodox to us. Yet that hasn't stopped them from appearing in an avalanche of literature and entertainment, including but not limited to Dawn of the Dead, Shaun of the Dead, Army of the Dead, Left 4 Dead, Walking Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Dead Rising, I Am Legend, Zombieland, Train to Busan, Resident Evil, 28 Days Later, World War C, Project Zombo, and so he went, cursed to list every single thing zombies have ever appeared in. Maybe let's just fast forward a couple millennia to skip over this part. Minecraft, Scooby-Doo, DayZ, Dying Light, and every MMORPG that has and ever will be. Where was I? What's so great about this type of creature is that the design applies to more than just humans. How about zombie dogs? Or zombie horses? Or zombie freaking dragons? From the likes of Warcath and Fal'Jur to the dragon-turned White Walker from Game of Thrones. In Skyrim, dragons become a pretty prominent threat that eventually you gotta find a way to dispose of. Most of us use local villagers as fodder and the surrounding buildings as cover to deal with these encounters, me included. So imagine the shock that struck down my spine when I entered this room in this dungeon and was met face to face with an enormous draconic skeleton. No guards to sacrifice, no houses to hide behind, just an endless pit of lesser healing potions and pure determination. Wait, goddammit, I'm talking about dragons again. But these winged skeletal beasts like the World Gobbler raise an interesting point, that undead creatures can be more than just rotting flesh monsters. Skeletons, while not as popular, seem just as prominent in the world of creature design. Skulls and bones are a universal symbol of death, as ideally an individual is gonna see about 0 of those things with their own eyes. So bringing these chunks of human remains back to life could be a traumatizing sight to behold. Again, doesn't even have to be a human. Literally anything that has a skeleton could be illustrated in this undead way. Just goes to show how incredibly versatile this spectral category is. From sinister vampires to unearthly ghouls, all forms of haunted wraiths and banshees, as simple as a ghostly mummy or as abnormal as a freakish revenant. You could go absolutely wild with crafting something that has returned from the other side, whether with its physical form intact or only the spirit remaining. Explain it away with magic, curses, or a virus. The possibilities really are endless. Just look at this boss from the Dark Souls series and tell me you can't get creative with just a skeleton design. Yeah, just a simple skelly boy might get old quickly, but how about a towering mass of every kind of bone found in the human body? The way it looks and moves unnerves me so very deeply. It's almost difficult to describe, but I'm sure not much more needs to be said for you to also feel what I mean. So Pyramid Head and No Face walked into a bar, and the bartender asked, "Why the long face?" Oh, you thought I was done talking about creepy little fucking bugs? Guess again. Yes, maybe let's scale the size down a bit as we travel back to the future, but the line of fact and fiction gets very blurry when we delve deep into the tiniest of cracks. Looking at the wild world of the insect kingdom, it almost feels like a creature flexed by Mother Nature, or a beta test playground for the forces above, as I honestly couldn't tell you which one of these is a real animal and which is not. A good example of this is Pokemon, as for the last 30 years, they've had the challenge of designing a whole sea of bug-type Pokemon. As usual, they never thrive too far away from actual animals, but because of the cute art style, they've had to get rather creative. And once you decide to peel off that filter of fluffiness, you're left with horrific monsters that start infesting your imagination. The trend of drawing Pokemon in the way they'd appear in the real world and making them as creepy as possible has been around for quite a while, and something about these bug types makes my spine want to leave my body. It's the perfect time to mention how many of these creatures overlap with the different types we're covering today, because the deeper you delve into these mystical lands, the more convoluted any singular design gets. And like Pokemon, you could almost attach types of tags on all of these various creatures, with one main category and then a secondary one and sometimes even a third one, because Mecha Kha'Zix is both a bug and a void monster and a machine. Speaking of Kha'Zix, it might be the only champion in League I've gotten a legit pentakill with, so it's always been very dear to my heart. Not just because it was fun to play in an otherwise unfun game, but because its design perfectly captures that insect-turned-monster vibe. Enormous sights for hands, a sleek exoskeleton, long wings, and even pin missiles. It's an A+ design that perfectly mixes many other characteristics and elements found in other media. But as far as cool looking insects go, that's pretty much it. The rest of them turn into rather otherworldly abominations, even if directly inspired by real arthropods. The art style of your project has never played a bigger role in deciding how disturbing your creatures are actually gonna look. On one hand, there's cute and almost cuddly Metroids, and on the other hand, Jesus fucking Christ, get the flamethrower! To get into specifics, I want to highlight one type of enemy from the Monster Hunter series, specifically Nerscylla, who unlike other types of its kind, resembles way less of an actual bug, and puts great spotlight on the monstrous side of its design. I think they're supposed to be spider-like feral beasts, but this one specifically just looks so strange, with like crab and beetle features combined into the mix. I absolutely hate it, which might as well be the best compliment you can give to a giant insect monster. In Hallownest, you discover an entire civilization of bug-related characters, each one odd in their own way. There's obvious examples like the Dung Defender being inspired by a dung beetle, and the Mantis Lords being derived from praying mantises. But there's way more obscure oddballs out there as well, like a spider named Hornet, or Radiance, who is in fact a moth god. The Mask Maker is supposedly a masked hunter bug, and I think this dude is supposed to resemble a type of leech. And the list goes on with all kinds of worms, grubs, flies, bees, and crickets just living their miserable little lives. If it exists, there's probably a Hollow Knight character similar to it. With critters, it's either the most adorable little fella you've ever seen, or a crawling spawn of Satan that you cannot unsee, no matter how hard you try. Damn, I really wouldn't like to live in Japan. If you think New York gets shagged a lot in alien movies, just imagine how bad they have it overseas. There are thousands, and I mean thousands of different kaiju monsters that have appeared over the decades of pop culture, and not one of them is as iconic as this motherfucker. Just narrowing the list down to just the creatures Godzilla itself has fought still leaves us with a sea of different enormous city-scaling beasts. From Mothra to Rodan, from King Kong to King Ghidorah, from this dude to this dude. No matter how much the designs differ, one key element is persistent, and that is of course the size. Ferocious behemoths would be terrifying enough on their own, but when you dip the scale far enough, the horrors become almost unimaginably large. His toe is as big as the street you live on. Let me say that again. His toe is as big as the street you live on. This Goliath of a creature is so big that to them you might as well not exist. Megalophobia has always been a weird subject to me, as I've always felt the great fear of very large things, however stupid that might sound.
It's bigger than that, Chris, it's large.
But I've never quite been able to explain exactly it. it. It's like that one time I was walking past the tallest building in London. I wasn't even aware I was in the proximity of it, but just coming around the corner you could instantly feel its presence as it towered far above every other tall building nearby. Feeling uneasy and quite curious, I stepped right near the wall and looked up. And I could not describe the feeling that shivered down my body. Just even the fact that I was no longer able to tell where the limit of this enormous structure ended was enough to make my head spin. Now replace the skyscraper with a 1,000 feet tall lizard and whoops, welcome to hell. I've never been a real fan of kaijus or the whole big lore surrounding them, but I've always had a very soft spot for the Kraken. Like, humor me for a second and imagine if there really were a land of ancient creatures deep within the earth. And I don't mean like dinosaurs still walking about, like some life form that has refused to wither away for millions of years, slowly evolved and grown in size between the cracks of the planet's core. It is the one creature I could actually imagine living that long, which would mean its size is far beyond that of the typical giant squid, like the entirety of Mariana's Trench filled with just one of the tentacles. Yeah, imagine that. So it's just like Pacific Rim. If I remembered exactly what happens at the end of that movie, then maybe, yes, sure, it is like Pacific Rim, which is by far the best visual representation of battles of such a grand scale. The fact that you watch each and every punch, kick and dash slowly charge up, which moreover makes the anticipated impact so much more satisfying. God, do I wish they made a second part to that movie. Gareth Edwards' Godzilla is another one of those spectacles that keeps the camera grounded. Thus the entire scope of the battle is almost difficult to grasp, because you're no longer a fly on the wall, you're part of a panicking crowd that's about to get stomped real hard. His movies in general have an amazing showcase of scale, whether it's Star Destroyers or the Titanosaurus. And then there's the 2016 hit comedy Colossal. Hathaway plays a 20-something-year-old Gloria who is a bit of a drunk and down on her luck. After returning to her hometown and reuniting with an old friend, some real weird shit starts happening. All the way over at Seoul, the whole city gets leveled as an enormous kaiju-like monster rampages over the streets. I love this scene of them learning of the catastrophe over the newscast. There's a perfect balance of this is too wild to comprehend and no way I got to see this with my own eyes.
The unprecedented nature of this phenomenon has shocked the scientific community around.
You know you're watching something that's going to change the course of history.
And then it turns out Gloria was actually the giant monster as she was drunkenly dancing in the playground. Wait, what? And when the plot turns mystical, the stakes get very real as Oscar shows his other, darker side of obsessiveness and abusiveness. This is a destructive gumbo for the people-pleasing and easily addicted Gloria. When things start spinning out of control, it's revealed that because of some childhood voodoo magic, Oscar also has an alter ego in the form of a giant robot. Trust me, this makes more sense than it seems. After a city-scaling confrontation between the two, Gloria overcomes the oppression in her life and stares destiny straight in the eyes. What a weird and wacky movie that might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it shows such an interesting way of translating themes and how reclaiming your agency makes you stronger than the monsters in your life. When we start getting to the territory of supernatural beasts, beings and entities, it starts to get difficult to draw a persistent outline. By just the name of supernatural, meaning not of nature, we're already told that any rules of typical creature design no longer apply. Usually that's the one key element that you can rely on. No matter how weird or obscure your creature becomes, if it feels like a living, breathing animal, then you're already halfway to grading immersion needed. But with ghosts and ghouls, what is there to even lean on? They don't eat, they don't sleep, their motivations are not of the natural kind. If survival is no longer an issue, what do instincts become used for? Throughout analog horror, we've seen numerous examples of evil forces wanting and needing to consume. It's not a type of feeding in the literal sense, instead a kind of devouring of one's soul, sucking the life out of you, feeding on your fears and emotions, or just a means to an end of civilization, that is. Like the alternates don't do what they do because they're hungry. The need for destruction lays way deeper within these entities. It's a metaphorical type of never-ending hunger that could only be fulfilled with your torture. They're not even the ones to kill you, they want you to do it yourself. Christianity and the ways of the Bible are always a difficult subject for me to talk about, as I feel nowhere close to being versed enough in the matter, but seeing how much influence hellish demons have had on our pop culture, it feels almost mandatory to mention them. If heaven is the ultimate state of pure satisfaction, then hell is the exact opposite, a physical manifestation of everything wrong with human nature, the filth, the sloth, the absolute greed that wriggles through some of us. You might think of a red burning underworld, but I've always felt that the idea is more of a self-reflection, the most twisted kind of mirror imaginable, held up for you to stare into. There are few things scarier than the thought of being stuck in your personalized hell, acquainted with the exact tools to drive you mad. And I think that's what makes the Mandela catalog so eerie. God is dead, hell is real, and you guys are fucked. If we step back towards the ground a bit and focus more on actual designs of these doom-bringing creatures, we're often met with deformed and warped figures, things that look almost human but are intentionally removed from reality to make them that much harder to perceive. Stuff with clear silhouettes, but once you start looking at specific details, it becomes that much more obscured. They're not of this world, but aren't from a completely different one either. They are designed weapons meant to destroy humanity from within. One of my favorite looking examples of this is from a movie called Late Night with the Devil, where after an exorcism goes wrong on live TV, we get a really cool looking version of a very atypical demon. Forget any kinds of wings and horns. This demon looks like a digital manifestation of I don't even know how to describe it. It just looks really cool, okay? But what if we're not dealing with the devil's minions? Not every spirit is purely designed to bring out the end days of humanity. Some have much smaller and more realistic goals. Friendly ghosts are rarely a thing in books, games, and movies. Even Knuckles knows as much.
There's no such thing as a friendly ghost.
What if they're out to hunt you specifically, and it seems like you've just stepped into its trap? The Blair Witch Project has to be one of my all-time favorite horror movies, as all the spooks and scares are delivered in a rather in a different way. Throughout the film, you never actually come to learn what or who the Blair Witch is, and by the end you kinda wish to never find out either. Even creatures without the design can seep into your memories, because if the showcase of their supernatural abilities is as well done as here, it's hard to forget. From the conjuration of giggling ghost children, to the reality bending of an inescapable forest, to, well... This tale is as old as time itself. In the late 18th century, Frankenstein decided to play God, and after lightning struck down on an assembly of corpses, a monster was born. No matter how many times this story gets retold, the underlying theme stays prevalent, and questions about life creating life start to raise. Whether you believe in evolution or a higher power, we can almost universally agree that childbirth feels like God's plan. It's too complicated and too specific for it to not be nature's way of telling us that sex is the meaning of life. But when that process becomes unnatural and strays into the gray area, where do you you draw the line? When does it become morally wrong to give life to something that didn't ask to be born? I don't have a mouth and I must scream. Well, now you do, so have at it. It's that element of unnatural creation, the striking visuals of a creature that just looks wrong, the forced evolution to shape it into something that should not exist. It's like Seed's mutant toys from the original Pixar classic. The whole plot of Toy Story requires some form of make-believe, but these freaky things take that concept to a whole nother level. Seed has no idea his nightmare puppets actually have a soul, and that his twisted way of playtime is causing so much agony to these freaks of nature. Then again, the great engineers rarely have any sympathy for their monstrous creations. Like, have you ever seen any kind of spore creature? No matter where you put its ears, eyes and nose, no matter how normal looking you try to make it, these things always look like they're in a world of pain. Whether you take the mechanical approach and build your monster out of wires, cogs and other little doodads, or you go down the lane of biochemical engineering and grow something horrific inside of a test tube, the outcome is usually the same. Either the experiment fails completely, fails partially, or fails unnoticed. I say unnoticed, as usually, even when the creation comes to life in a spectacular way, exceeding any and all expectations and seemingly being a huge success, at the end of the day, you've still created something without a purpose. These monsters are often created with specific missions in mind, and if cooperative, they're tasked to do some dark bidding or dirty work, and almost every time, the grand plan backfires and this lost soul is left to wonder, what am I? Mewtwo is maybe the most prominent example that comes to mind. Created by Team Rocket as the ultimate life form, the strongest Pokemon there is, and thus the most powerful weapon ever created, but giving something that intelligent so much raw power, and then telling it was born to be a slave. You can see why these plans don't work out all too often. Mewtwo has always represented the choice of deciding yourself who you are. That even though you were brought into this world against your will, you are here now, and you might as well take the most out of the life you've been given, however horrid your childhood was. Another incredible form of artificial life comes from the Horizon games. Their designs are a perfect blend of man-made creation and beast-like behavior. They're not quite machines anymore, but they're definitely not animals either. They originate from a failed AI experiment of building a safeguard against humanity's biggest threats. Now, in the far future of the post-apocalypse, these magnificent beings roam the desolate lands. Technically, the experiment didn't exactly fail, as these robots terraformed the planet back to life, but due to a malfunction in the central systems, these things have become incredibly hostile towards anyone made of flesh and blood. It's kinda scary to think how much more relevant the story of these games has become since the first one released. These topics are fun to yap about because we're talking about imaginary wonders, but when our very real humanity is no longer that far from creating monsters like this, you just gotta wonder what waits ahead of us. Now we're getting to the unknown territories. From here on out, no single thing is guaranteed, because where we are going, nobody has yet to return. Void, at its very core, is not that complicated of a matter, or at least the basic design of it is pretty easy to understand. It represents the absence of everything. It is not just a deep dark hole where no light escapes from, it is literally the existence of nothing. So how do you draw a creature whose whole theme is nothingness? Well, maybe let's ask the artist over at Riot Games, because as of the writing of this video, there are a total of 9 Void-themed champions in the game, and even more various creatures and characters in the expansive lore surrounding it. I truly wish I could just stick to Arcane, but sadly, yes, we actually gotta talk about League of Legends.
Looks like you're going to the Shadow Realm.
In the game, Void is a specific place, a type of mirror dimension that lies parallel, but outside of the space of Runeterra. As they said it themselves, it is not just a place, it is a fundamental force of unmaking. The whole idea is that life is not created inside of the void, rather it gets trapped there, caught in its dark grasp and mutated to a point of no recognition. Yes, there are beings that were born there like Cho'Gath and Vel'Koz, but we also see characters like Kassadin and Malzahar who've been consumed by this purple disease, spreading across their bodies like a plague and giving away to some insane new powers. These champions are described as madmen whose state of mind has been altered and their bodies have been given a new purpose, not to feed for the sake of survival, but to consume and spread this infectious void, erase all existence, so it may return to perfect silence and stillness. Imagine the deep vastness of space, where there is just absolutely nothing, for light years upon light years, just pure nothingness. You can also look at it as a type of corruption, not a literal black hole. Often enough, the visual resemblance makes it hard to even tell the difference. Dark and purplish colors, sleek, almost xenomorph-like design, unnatural body shapes and freakishly long limbs. Or sometimes you see the exact opposite, with decaying features on an almost undistinguishable biomass. It was just a couple of months ago when I was playing through Silksong after a long 7-year wait. Spoilers ahead, but during the third act, you go on a mission to reach deep down into the ground, beyond any living nook or cranny, and after a very long descent, you arrive in the void. The various creatures you find throughout these tunnels are all a great example of these kinds of design choices. Multiple legs and eyes, erratic movements, black goo oozing from the monsters, with teeth where they're not supposed to be, and screams of agony that make you both terrified and almost sympathetic. Or you can go back to the very basics and design a figure with 2 white dots for eyes. Anything from Minecraft creepypastas to digital horror series, or as the wider public was introduced this year to Marvel's Void. It is almost unbelievable how simple yet incredibly effective this design is, and I love how much of an instant intrigue is thus created, because there just isn't enough there to answer your questions. Although the movie version looks great, I do still hope we eventually get to see a more eldritch type of style in live action as well. In 1912, a Danish botanist and mycologist, H.K.H. Bogen, first described and documented a highly unusual form of parasitism. He and his colleagues found dead ants clamped to the undersides of leaves by their fangs in a kind of rigid death grip. They noticed a long stalk growing from the ants' head, ending in a bulb containing spores, and realized the fungus forced ants to climb plants before dying, giving the fungus an ideal height for dispersal. This phenomena would later come to be coined as the summit disease. But most importantly, the scientists determined that these fungi, after attaching themselves to the host's body, would take control of the animal's motor skills and alter its behavior. No longer in control, sometimes already dead, these ants would search for ideal spots for the parasite to keep spreading its spores. And for the first time ever, a real scientific paper described the research as zombie ants. As they say, fact is often stranger than fiction, and in this case, reality is far more disgusting than anything a zombie flick could ever make up. To imagine your own body getting hijacked by an infectious, crawling disease, a little fungus growing under your skin, slowly stealing away all your senses one by one, until you let go of your own consciousness, being stuck in the backseat of your own mind, as the parasite slowly eats away at your insides, your body now merely an empty husk of a vessel, with your whole purpose coming to a singular dead end: keep spreading the virus. While The Last of Us games can get pretty spooky at moments, the TV show relies more on the drama to tell its narrative, and leaves the horror of the outbreak to linger in the background, never quite letting you forget that things are far from normal, but just enough for the characters to have their moments of peace. But it is during the opening of the very first episode when reality comes crashing down, as this scene makes the fictional virus feel very grounded, and maybe even a bit too realistic.
Cordyceps, aspergillus, any one of them could become capable of burrowing into our brains and taking control not of millions of us, but billions of us.
Every now and again I see a meme floating around the internet that almost like ranks different kinds of zombie outbreaks by how fucked we as a society would be, and every single time the clickers are agreed upon as the worst case scenario, an absolute game over for everybody on Earth, as winning against an ever-consuming spread of spores might as well be impossible. The Last of Us is far from the only instance of a parasitic form of undead army. We also see it in the likes of Resident Evil and Halo, with the Flood being especially interesting, just because of how striking it looks. The monsters look similar to one another, yet all unique and almost random in the way they've grown, resembling how real ants would get infected. The Flood also looks to spread out of any hole and in any direction, whatever necessary to consume the host. We even get a sense of how this parasite looks after infecting different kinds of life forms, and furthermore we get a look of how it's even consuming the environment itself. H.P. Lovecraft might have my favorite depiction of this trope, while his creations are expectedly less grounded and more in the realms of cosmic horror. The way he describes these eldritch beasts is exactly what I'd imagine would happen if a parasite like this started to have malicious intent, or become far more powerful than it was ever supposed to be. Ancient gods and unimaginable horrors I can handle, but these things, oh hell nah.
Are you challenging me?
If you really think about it, like really hard, then to be honest, it doesn't get much more horrifying than this. In the right kind of environment, with enough bodies around to consume, this hostile leeching biomass would be unstoppable. From the walls to the floors, from your mom to your dog, with enough food, water and sunlight, this disease could cover the entire planet. And once there is nothing more to consume, it itself would slowly start to die out. All that death and destruction, only for this Antichrist in the form of a freaking mushroom to also just perish away. The lives of everything and everyone, all in vain, just because this parasite was doing what it was destined to do. It just happened to do its job a little too well.
So if that happens,
We lose.
And with that, it's time to wrap up our adventure for the day. I hope your underwear is still dry and that you enjoyed your time here. I'm sure we'll one day continue this search for the mysteries of the great beyond. So I'd love for you to tell me in the comments below, what kinds of creatures would you like to see featured in this series? Well, down there you might as well leave a like just for good luck. You never know when you're gonna need it. But alas, until we meet again, my dear friends, remember, just whatever you do, do not look behind you.